So just imagine if Bender and Leela from Futurama had like a neurotic love child. It would be the AI from this movie, right? Hi there. Welcome to Underground Cinema. I'm Ben, your underground conductor. This week we'll be talking about the 1999 Disney Channel movie Smart House. 25 years already, am I right? This was a film I genuinely loved as a kid. I feel like it's probably lesser known compared to like other Disney Channel productions like High School Musical or Halloween Town, but I really enjoyed it when I was younger. But that being said, I didn't remember much of it until this rewatch. The thing I remember enjoying most as a child was like this futuristic tone, the fantasy of having a house that would do everything for you. And watching this film as an adult, it's really interesting to like sort of see a lot of the elements that came into play. A lot of this film is obviously heavily based on the idea of the smart home that was very prevalent during the modernist era of the early 1900s and especially the 1950s. At the time, model homes that could offer you every single convenience were very much something that people were seeking after. Westinghouse obviously dipped their toes into this concept with their model all-electric homes that had regulated temperature, entire walls that were made out of lights, door cameras that could show you exactly who was there to see you. Monsanto dipped their toes into like this idea as well with their home of the future that they had stationed at Disneyland. This idea of a smart home is actually very common in science fiction. You actually see it in Back to the Future Part 2 with both the 80s cafe and Marty McFly's house with their instant pizza dehydration machine and their TV that plays multiple things at once, and they even have a projector wall like in Smart House. It makes sense, conceptually speaking, because the first Back to the Future is obviously a 50s nostalgia film, and it's sort of fitting that the second movie is sort of a look at a future that people assumed the future would be like in the 1950s. Smart House is very much in the same vein as that. And it's really interesting to see the idea sort of come into fruition in like the late 90s because people assumed that smart homes would become prevalent in like the 1980s. But you see it in this film in the late 90s. It's sort of like this turning point. Now getting into the film itself, I really find the creative force behind this film interesting. Not only does it star Katey Sagal as the main AI, for those of you who don't know, Katey Sagal among many things, famously played Leela in Futurama. But the film is also directed by LeVar Burton, who famously hosted the television program Reading Rainbow and also played himself in Community. Oh yeah, he was also the blind guy in Star Trek. Dude, Captain. Borg are boarding the ship immediately. We don't know what to do. What do we do? The AI is going to take over the Enterprise. There's nothing we can do. The Borg... Did I leave this camera on? Anyway, I find it interesting, like, this massive icon of science fiction in the 90s ended up directing a somewhat modern sci-fi film like Smart House. The film itself is very competently put together. It's clear that it is a television production, but it also, retains the charm of like that kind of like low-level production that you'd find in the late 90s, especially on Disney Channel. The film also has quite a bit of emotional weight to it. It centers around this family called the Coopers, who are missing the key element of like a mother, a caretaker in their lives. Then they move into this house and come across the ultimate caretaker, an AI assistant that can sort of take care of every convenience for them. The main character of the film is a character named Ben, funnily enough. Ben feels like he carries his entire family on his shoulders. He feels like he's the emotional bedrock of the house, which is not entirely incorrect. He's a character who's very much scarred by this traumatic event of losing his mother 4 years earlier, and he feels like if any other woman comes into his family's life, it's going to sort of undermine what his mother represented to him. Throughout the movie, we see instances of Ben cock-blocking his father, keeping him from, going out with certain women. And that's entertaining, but you sort of come to understand throughout the movie it's because he's sort of afraid of things changing in his life. He's also going through adolescence, which is a very difficult time, so he's a very emotionally troubled character. There's also his sister, Angie, who's probably the best character in the film. She's absolutely hilarious, very charming. Angie was actually played by a young actress named Katie Volding, and honestly, despite being younger than Ryan Merriman, who plays Ben, it feels like she gives in a stronger performance than Ryan Merriman. That's not dissing Ryan Merriman. This was an early role for him. He's done much better roles since then, but in this film specifically, it feels like the younger actress actually gives a better performance than the older actor. It's probably because she had experience in acting beforehand, being in several different films, including The Little Rascals, and that experience definitely shows. She's probably the most charming character in the movie. She's an amazing source of comic relief. She feels like a genuine child who'd be sort of thrusted into this narrative. Everything about her performance really works. That being said, obviously the real standout in the film is Katey Sagal's character, Pat. Pat is like this learning AI. Pat itself is an acronym for Personal Applied Technology. Her whole gimmick is that she's supposed to analyze the people living in the house, and maximize their comfort based on the information she takes in. It's adaptive learning AI, sort of like what we have now, which is part of the reason why this film has aged really well, and also why we should probably be concerned about this. But what can you do? Katey Sagal gives a stellar performance in this film. It's actually funny because you don't really see her in person until near the end of the film. Throughout the film, she becomes more and more emotional until she basically builds herself like an AI projected body. It's sort of interesting seeing how her performance evolves throughout the film, because at the very beginning, Pat is very much a stoic, sort of robotic character, and as she learns more, she becomes more emotional. Obviously, she's also tampered with in the film, but her performance gets stronger and stronger the more human she becomes, until eventually it peaks at her gaining this visual form, which really shows the talent that Katey Sagal has as the character changes over time, as she's reprogrammed and as she learns more. The performance becomes more distinct, up to the point where she literally builds a body for herself. And the scene where she first interacts with a character, being Ben, she chews that scenery. She's so frightening. She's emoting very strongly with her face. She feels like a very neurotic and underappreciated individual who is scorned by the family that she's been sworn to serve. It's incredibly off-putting. She gives a very emotive performance, and you don't really see her in live action throughout the film that often, but that leaves an impression. It's probably the reason why that they use a lot of her physical body in the marketing for the film. You see her on the poster. Obviously, Katey Sagal is a very talented actress, but, seeing her in person and seeing the way she's actually able to project emotion, it's truly astounding. I also find it funny when Pat gives herself a form. She basically models herself off of a 1950s housewife. Obviously, earlier on in the film, Ben breaks into her CPU room and loads up all these classic 1950s style shows, very much in the same vein as Leave It to Beaver or Father Knows Best. I think one of the actual fake sitcoms he tells her to watch is called Mother Knows Best. In any case, obviously, based on all that input, she projects a body that looks like a classic 1950s housewife. She has the big shiny hair, the bangs, she's wearing the poofy dress with the skirt that plays out at the bottom. Funny thing, it actually reminds me of the outfit that Leela wore in that episode of Futurama Roswell that ends well when they end up back in the 1940s. But that overall 50s aesthetic not only, is reminiscent of those classic sitcoms, but it also sort of feeds directly into this concept of the 1950s model smart home. Side note, apparently a lot of the technology in this film was based on real technology, ? One of the writers of the film, Stu Krieger, apparently went to visit NASA before he began writing the film, and a lot of the technology that you see in the film is based on what he observed at NASA. The idea was basically that he wanted the technology seen in this film to be somewhat based in what was present at the time. So when questioned about the realism of the technology you see, his response was basically that he took what he perceived we'd already done and envisioned where we would logically go in the future. It's quite interesting. There's not really that much to critique in terms of what this film does. I think it does have a strong emotional core that carries it. I think something notable to bring up, though, is that it does feel like things kind of just wrap up in a nice little bow without earning it. I can't prove this, but I genuinely suspect that a lot of this movie was meant to be a backdoor pilot to a series. A lot of the side characters are fully fleshed out, they have names and clear characteristics that are definable, and most of them disappear after the second act. There's a long-term goal that Ben, the main character, has where he wants to get on the basketball team, and they never really follow through on that. Katey Sagal's character, Pat, her sort of insecurity about not being real just kind of disappears by the end of the film, and she kind of just becomes a program in the wall. It's actually kind of funny. I had a real Mandela effect with this movie on my rewatch, because at the end of the film, where you see Pat's face in the wall, you know, she's blended her program with her actual perception of self. I could have sworn I remembered her glitching. I thought that was supposed to foreshadow something to come, but that just didn't happen. It really feels like a lot of it was meant to continue, either in future movies or in a show. I can't prove that, but given how Disney Channel functions, it wouldn't surprise me if that would have been the case at one point. In any case, I really enjoy this movie. Obviously, there's a lot of elements of this film that I feel weren't followed through on properly and that I'd like to see continue. But ultimately, I really love the overall tone of this film. It is something that's of the 90s, but it feels like it's looking forward, which is kind of the point of the movie. You know, it's called Smart House. It's based in like this futuristic idea, so a lot of it does feel like it's looking forward. It's a very wholesome film, but it also does not feel sanitized. And there's a couple of fun references you see in the film. There's a reference to Attack of the Killer Tomatoes in one scene where it's like, oh, it's the Attack of the Killer Oranges. There's also a scene at the party where all the kids are dancing in a lineup and it looks very much like Soul Train. I do have some questions about like the real estate implications in this film. You know, just the realtor side of my brain talking, because the Cooper characters already had a house in the movie and they just kind of move in, but they never address if they sell the house or if they keep it. Is the mortgage paid off? Are you still paying it? And also, was the Smart House in a living trust? Because it was just kind of transferred to them cleanly. I know they won in a contest, but like, are property taxes not a thing? Just little things that pop into my head. Overall, though, this was a fun film. Like, it's not technically a masterpiece. It does leave things to be desired, but I can't really say that anything about this film is, like, wrong. You know, it was made in a very particular way. It presents a very specific perspective of not only a family, but the way a family interacts with, like, this early AI. And also, considering where AI has come nowadays with adaptive learning, it feels like it's aged phenomenally well. It actually makes me wonder if we'll come across an evil robot Katey Sagal sometime in the near future. That is my take on the Disney film Smart House. It's a nostalgic relic from my childhood. I can't really be too harsh on it, but I think that there are interesting elements of it. I'd recommend anyone who's curious watch it. Just know what you're getting into. It is a Disney Channel production. That has been this episode of Underground Cinema. I thank you for coming back. If you chose to come back after my first video, feel free to subscribe if you want to see more. Follow me on Instagram or Letterboxd if you want to hear more of my film takes. And I'll catch you on the next one. Funny thing, when they actually made the actual Geordi visor for Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 1 and 2, it was just a banana hair clip. Like, this is a 3D print. I 3D printed this a few years ago, but when I originally made one, I made one out of an actual banana clip. I thought it'd be funny.